Hey everybody, Hooch here, and if you're watching the video, please consider subscribing because according to YouTube, not enough data to show this report. Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to do a quick follow-up video to the first Diablo video I posted. That was my thoughts and opinions on going into the game blind, not doing any kind of research or watching theory crafting heading into it. I did want to pause and again look back on maybe some of my views and how they changed. This is actually more of a casual's perspective in a way. I wanted to be streaming this game. I stream 5-6 days a week, usually upwards of 10 plus hours a stream. But for a couple of different reasons, I'm not really able to successfully stream this. Mainly hardware issues, but there's a few other issues as well. But in any event, so I've been playing this on my own time, and because of that, the number of hours I've put into this per day would probably be on par with a casual, certainly more so than a true hardcore gamer. I mean, you can see I'm only at level 60, but I think if you were to average out the number of hours I've played, it would come around to basically coming home from work, playing for a couple hours, and then going to bed. So with that said, some of the differences, actually the main difference I had from the last video I made, I mentioned that like legendaries were not dropping that fast. Once you get higher level, they drop like candy. The chase here is really the uniques. If you are just kind of looking for the dopamine rush of something dropping, so in any event, legendaries will drop like candy because honestly, what you're really looking for are the legendary benefits and finding one that rolls really high for whatever your build is. So I won't go too much in my build. I did end up, after I beat the game, which I did completely blind. I didn't follow a guide. I didn't follow a build. I didn't follow a gearing. I didn't follow anything that told me how to play the game. Basically, I figured you only get one of these games every decade or so, and I believe it was a guy, DM Diablo 4 DM is the creator's name, who eloquently summed up what a lot of us have been saying for a while, which is people bemoan the modern video game and how it was better back in the day. And there's certainly some truth to that. But at the end of the day, if you want to enjoy a game like you did 10, 20 years ago, you have to play it like that. And so that means not looking up guides and figuring out the meta before the game even launches, and then just following someone else's build and guide and preset way to beat the game and how to level and all that kind of stuff. So I went into it completely blind. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the campaign is great. I think there's enough value from a number of hours perspective in beating the campaign to justify the price ish. I mean, it is $70 at base price. So those things are, the price is creeping up, but I had a ton of fun, honestly, and it was worth it for me. And that's only part of the game. The next part is leveling basically as much as you want. I mean, nobody says you have to get to level 100. So, in any event, my build is still Whirlwind. My legendaries are not what I've seen most people running. Not to go too heavily into it, but basically, it's kind of more centered around bleed. I have so Whirlwind is going to cause a bleed. There's something I have that direct damage to bleeding enemies, has a chance to stun them. I then do additional damage, 76% in this roll, damage to stunned enemies. And when you stun a bleeding enemy, it deals a percentage of that bleed amount to them as physical damage. So it's kind of centered around that. Like I said, I've been able to clear dungeons even at level like late 50s. I cleared a couple level 70 nightmare dungeons. 17, sorry, tier 17. But the enemies were level 70. So it's definitely possible. I find even now I don't need to fully meta myself and follow a guide in order to not only do current level content, but content that arguably I shouldn't even be able to do. Maybe that's just how powerful the barb is. I have started a sorcerer, but it's still very early on that. So in any event, cosmetics I think are actually pretty solid. They do sell cosmetics. I don't have any. I've gotten some of the drops from watching streamers, but I actually think it's pretty cool how good some of these cosmetics actually look. So hopefully that doesn't change. Hopefully with successive seasons or whatever they're gonna, whatever they're doing, they continue to release more, because I will say that after a while, you do start to wish that there were more. Yeah, some more variety would be nice, just to kind of cycle in and out, because you're going to be doing a lot of dungeon grinding. So one of the things you can do is maybe have some higher end chase cosmetics or something. I'm still enjoying dungeon farming. They nerfed it, but I still have fun doing it. Yes, I haven't run 8,000 dungeons to rush to world first level 100, but I was never going to do that anyway. That said, some of the dungeon progress quests, so with each dungeon, you usually have to kind of, you hit a first stage, a second stage, and then there's a boss or maybe a group of elites. Some of them are annoying. I would say the slay all enemies one is probably the most egregious, especially because it marks all enemies on your map, number one. Well, that's actually useful, but if you do like a dungeon event inside of it, it can sometimes be a little bit confusing trying to hit a mastery when there's a lot of red dots on the map and you don't know which one is actually for the chest or for the event or whatever you're doing. But I hopefully they'll announce some kind of changes to like the slay all. Maybe it's just slaying a certain amount, so you have to, instead of killing 100%, maybe you kill 90% or 80% or something like that. And maybe dungeon events which spawn enemies can count towards that percentage. One other thing, and I said I am still enjoying dungeon farming, dungeon grinding a bit, but I can see how it would be boring and can get boring. And at level 60, the grind to level 100 would mean a whole hell of a lot more farming, and dungeon farming in particular. So one thing they could do, I've noticed when I have started grouping with people, they tend to want to run specific dungeons. And I'm guessing it's because they figured out, or somebody has figured out, that certain dungeons are just better from layout perspective, from density of elite mobs perspective. So one thing they could do is buff the Tree of Whispers XP. So when you get to Tree of Whispers, um, you'll have to either progress through part of the campaign, or something that's cool is when you start a new character after you beat the campaign, you can choose to just not do the campaign and you kind of just do overworld, kind of what you do post campaign, just for the whole game. One thing they could do is buff the Tree of Whispers boxes. So when you open them, they give you more XP. And so in that way, instead of just running one or so dungeon over and over, you could be running different dungeons that are, rotated through for these Grim Favor rewards. And that way you can still have your pick in terms of, I want to do dungeon running. Let's say you enjoy that. Let's say, putting aside the fact that that might be the best way from an XP perspective, most efficient. If that's what you want to do, let's let players do it. But I would like a change of scenery. I would think most people would, other than the people who are just racing to 100. You want efficiency, and they probably do like running the same dungeon. Just rotate these through, give more XP for getting the boxes from the tree, and then that way you can just rotate from dungeons. Along with that, they've been nerfing dungeon XP. Makes sense. I don't think, I mean, historically, that is kind of what you do in Diablo, especially Diablo 2. For then, it was more so for rune farms, but you would also do it for XP. You do bail runs or something, trying to hit level 99. But they have an overworld in this game. It is far more expansive of an overworld than Diablo, certainly Diablo 2 and even Diablo 3. So we're bordering on MMO with 90% of people sticking their heads in dungeons and never leaving. So maybe they could also just buff some of these events in particular. And with that, you're still earning, this would still tie back into the Tree of Whispers, which would earn you Grim Favors, which would earn you boxes, which would have buffed XP, but you wouldn't have to sit in dungeons 24/7. So one thing that you will, or at least I had to, and I feel like most people have to look up, are what do affixes mean, and what is better. And there are some that are, for example, multiplicative as opposed to additive. And I didn't even know that was a difference. I assumed they were all multiplicative. So some stats that on their face seem like they will be more useful may not be, and vice versa. So once you hit a wall, you'll probably look up a build anyway, and that build will take that into account. But from somebody who wanted to go as long as possible, and pretty much did, and still is to some degree, not just following a guide, it would be great if there was some sort of way in the game to tell you which stats are multiplicative, which are additive, and maybe just a better breakdown of what each stats means. I mean, I was started leveling up the sorcerer, so I hadn't seen some of these stats in drops, but lightning damage versus lightning skill damage versus there's all these different ways. I find myself putting on gear and then looking at my like, does this increase the damage? But then some of that damage isn't just going to show up when you cursor over your ability. So it would be great if it was a little bit more intuitive. And what isn't intuitive, there could be an encyclopedia of some. I mean, if you can fit a fully 3D animated shop in the game, you can fit a encyclopedia of sorts to tell us what actual stats, the basics of an ARPG game in the first place. So I don't think that's too much to ask. I hope they do it. And another thing would be, and a lot of people mention this, but like a gem tab. I'm not literally full. I've tried to keep, I've tried to get rid of as many legendaries as possible and not just hoard them completely. I do try to keep just about anything that is a max roll on one of the legendary bonuses, because builds can change. Maybe I want to change my build, even if it's not the best. I just want to try something new. And so you just kind of never know. And so from that hoarding perspective, I do tend to keep a lot of legendaries, but I try to only do it if the roll is a high or max roll. One other thing that's more of a quality of life would be having multiple builds saved. So there's a lot of UI space here. This is, I mean, sure, I'm full screen now, but even so, like, there's a lot of UI space to do this. And this is kind of like if you played World of Warcraft, they have, I forget what it's called. I think they introduced it in Wrath, but it was the ability to swap specs. So I want people to feel free, to experiment. And it's not a huge barrier, but it is kind of annoying because you're not going to literally memorize what your build is. Yes, you can follow a guide, and this is pretty much somebody's guide at this point. So it's not terrible, but it would be so much better if right here or even just a tab up here, you could swap between builds, which were completely different. One might be a bleed build, one might be a physical build, one might be Hammer of the Ancients. As a sorcerer, it could be fire, ice, and lightning, right? Like, those are vastly different strategies. Lightning is more melee ranged, ironically, and the others aren't. And it would be nice just to swap between the two of them. You'd still pay it'd effectively be like hitting a refund all button. So you'd still pay whatever the gold cost is. Last but not least, one thing that I didn't really notice at the time, but I have noticed now, and noticed also as I started leveling up my second character, are how much I don't like side quests. I largely ignored them. I mean, you can see, I don't think there's a single zone where I've done even half of them. Now, I do need to go and get them because my renown is so low, and renown is important because it gives you, it's like 1 potion, 2 skill points, and then paragon points at the final. So you are going to have to do them, but they're kind of annoying. Some of them can get bugged, but additionally, one quality of life. So this is a quest giver. It would be really nice because some of these actually have you going into dungeons, and you might be going into those dungeons anyway to get aspects, to farm Tree of Whisper. I always call them blood points, grim favors. So maybe next to this blue question mark, or instead of the blue question mark, it could be a blue icon denoting that this is something that will send you to a dungeon. Another one would be like the world bosses. I just did Avarice yesterday, and I was pretty underwhelmed with the rewards. Yeah, I got like a couple legendaries that were, at the end of the day, not good for me anyway. They weren't that useful. Their rolls weren't that high either. So it was kind of like whatever. It was fun to do. Like, I want to experience all the world bosses, but considering you're not able to farm them like you are dungeons, they're unpredictable in a sense. Again, as a casual player who's not on the game 10 to 16 hours a day, it is more likely than not that I will miss them. There are stretches of time that I just don't play this game days at a time. So it is not farmable for me. So I would love to get a solid chunk of XP. Give me a meaningful amount of XP. Um each level has 3 Paragon points. So like give me half a level, or give me up to 1 Paragon point or something. Certainly in my 60s. I mean, I get it. They don't want to just give it away too freely, but it's a world boss. You can only get it so often, and the gear drops aren't even that great. So just a little bit more rewards on some of the overworld stuff. It feels like they put so much time and effort onto the overworld, and that's not to denigrate or say that the dungeons aren't great, but the overworld is to me the big difference between something like a Diablo 2 in this game, or Diablo 3 also. And so I want to play more in it, frankly. I want to do it more, but a lot of these are kind of either pointless or boring and not rewarding and whatever. So if they want to nerf dungeons, fine. But what is the buff? Making it harder for people who are going to no life this game is not going to do anything, because they will continue to no life this game. And instead, it just punishes more casual players who make up the vast majority of the player base, and who are you are going to rely on to make this game more financially feasible to continue to deliver content updates. So as much as hardcore players, and by hardcore I mean people who know life the game, not the specific game mode, as much as they are like, make the game for me, fuck the casual, fuck the noob, who gives a fuck about them, like you need them as a no lifer to be involved. Otherwise, Activision Blizzard, the corporation, will not continue to make content for this game. I will continue to play this. Some of these may change, some of these opinions may change, but I think they probably won't. The only one I see changing probably the most is just, I still find dungeon grinding fun. That one seems like one that could very realistically change after I just run 300 dungeons and get like half a level of XP or something. So in any event, that'll do it for me. Thanks so much for watching. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, it absolutely is the best way to help the channel grow. And come catch me live on Twitch. It's the same name, Hooch, actually. I'm streaming 5-6 days a week. Thanks so much again. Take it easy. Bye.